They vanished into a wall of sand, outnumbered, outgunned, and in just 1 hour, changed the course of armored warfare forever. This is the untold story of the last great tank battle of the 20th century, where steel clashed with fire, and legends were forged at 73 Easting. If this story moves you, if you believe history's heroes should never be forgotten, hit that subscribe button and join us. We bring you true stories from the battlefield, one voice, one sacrifice at a time. This is good old days, where the past feels alive again. The desert was still, eerily still, under the heavy breath of a looming sandstorm. Pale morning light filtered through a curtain of dust, painted the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border in muted shades of gold and gray. It was February 26, 1991. Just hours before sunrise, the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment of the United States Army, tired from days of tension but sharpened like razors from months of training, prepared to make history. The wind whipped across the desert floor, dragging trails of sand like the skirts of ghosts. In the belly of every Abrams tank, diesel engines throbbed like restrained beasts, their idle rumble echoing through the ground beneath. Inside Eagle Troop's lead vehicle, Captain H.R. McMaster adjusted his goggles and stared into nothingness, just swirling grit and silence. But in his gut he felt the edge of something colossal. Orders had been received. They were to push east, across an invisible grid line known as Easting 73. Beyond it, somewhere in the murk, waited Saddam Hussein's elite, the Republican Guard Tawakalna Division. What no one yet knew, not the high command, not even McMaster, was that within the next few hours, this anonymous stretch of desert would become the stage for the last great tank battle of the 20th century. As Eagle Troop advanced, their formation fanned across the dunes in textbook coordination, like iron wolves closing in on unseen prey. Visibility was a nightmare, maybe 400 meters on a good stretch. But that was part of the plan. The enemy's radar had failed. US satellites and GPS kept guiding the 2nd. ACR like hunters in the dark. Suddenly contact. At 3:20 p.m., an M3 Bradley fighting vehicle called Apache spotted a line of enemy silhouettes through its thermal scope. T-72s, and they were loaded for war. In an instant, fire orders snapped through the comms. Gunner, Sabat, T-72, 400 meters. The Abrams main gun roared. A tungsten shell shrieked from the barrel, slicing through grit and silence. One heartbeat later, an explosion lit the haze like lightning. The Iraqi tank disappeared in a bloom of smoke and steel shards. The Americans had struck first, and they wouldn't stop. Dozens of tanks lined in staggered formations began firing one after another. Muzzle blasts lit the desert like the strobe of a battlefield god, and the ground shuddered beneath the sheer weight of mechanized fury. The Iraqis fired back, but their rounds, old, mostly sabot shells, bounced off the Abrams like marbles off concrete. US gunners, trained for speed and precision, delivered lethal hits every few seconds. One tank crew hit 5 targets in under 3 minutes. Tracers carved arcs of fire across the horizon. Sand flew upward in massive plumes, masking death in every direction. It wasn't a firefight. It was slaughter. The Iraqis, brave but outgunned, fought as hard as they could. Some managed to score glancing hits. A few Bradleys were struck, one by an RPG, that turned it into a ball of fire. But the momentum was one-sided. Eagle Troop kept moving. Abrams tanks flanked enemy armor with mechanical grace, firing on the move, retreating, repositioning, striking again. McMaster's own tank destroyed several T-72s and even wheeled to knock out artillery pieces hidden behind a ridge. What made it even more extraordinary was the crew's coordination. These weren't just machines. They were iron phantoms, piloted by men who had memorized every command, every sequence like dancers performing a deadly waltz. One tank, Crazy Horse, disabled 3 armored personnel carriers and continued, firing even as a 2nd tank rolled over its own trail of fire. And then came the moment when Eagle Troop crested a ridge and found themselves face to face with a dug-in enemy, force of 8 Iraqi tanks in hull defilade. It should have been a deadly trap. But instead, within 23 seconds, every Iraqi vehicle had been turned to molten wreckage. It was not just superior firepower, it was doctrine. Discipline and fury made manifest. As dusk bled into night, the desert glowed with a strange fire. The battle wasn't over. South of Eagle Troop, other units of the 2nd ACR engaged in their own brutal dances with death. Ghost Troop and Killer Troop, equally resolute, collided with entire regiments of Iraqi forces, shredding them in wave after wave of relentless barrages. The air grew thick with the smell of burning oil, shredded metal, and scorched uniforms. Overhead, Apache helicopters darted in and out of the smoke columns, raining Hellfire missiles on fleeing vehicles. But not every target was hostile. Amidst the madness, American troops encountered groups of surrendering Iraqis, some waving white cloth, others kneeling in the sand with tears streaking their faces. Most were conscripts, kids, farmers, men who had no choice. Some U.S. troops, shaken, handed them water and blankets. One lieutenant radioed back, "They're not fighters anymore. They're just people." Yet just over the next ridge, the fury continued. Another enemy position was uncovered, more artillery emplacements, and so the thunder rolled once again. For hours it continued. The radios crackled with adrenaline and grit. "Target, fire! Good hit!" The screams of dying engines echoed through the air. Flames leapt from the hulls of T-55s and BMPs. The sand turned black with fuel and fire. And through it all, the 2nd ACR pressed forward. The shockwave from each blast seemed to shake the bones of the earth itself. And yet, even in such overwhelming dominance, loss found its way in. One Bradley crew was hit by friendly fire in the haze, a tragedy that sobered the men faster than any order ever could. They paused for breath, standing beside the smoldering vehicle, listening to the desert fall silent again. But they couldn't dwell. War was still unfolding. The battle wasn't done, and then it ended, quietly, almost without notice. As night deepened and the smoke cleared, what remained was not just a battlefield. It was a graveyard of steel. Dozens, maybe hundreds of enemy vehicles lay destroyed across the sand. T-72s burned with low, oily flames. Artillery pieces, charred and twisted, lay like broken teeth across the dunes. The Americans regrouped. Crews emerged from hatches, covered in soot and sweat. Some dropped to their knees. Some looked to the stars. Others just lit cigarettes with shaking hands. The Battle of 73 Easting was over. In a few hours of combat, U.S. forces had annihilated a massive enemy, armored formation with virtually no losses. It was a display of absolute dominance, of tactics, technology, and training all converging in a single historic flashpoint. And yet no one cheered. There were no victory cries, just the hush of wind and the groan of cooling metal. As the sun rose the next morning, the desert revealed the true scale of what had occurred. Charred columns of smoke still drifted into the sky, casting shadows over wrecked convoys and shattered artillery lines. Abrams tanks stood silently over the remnants of Saddam's once feared Republican Guard. In the distance, a lone U.S. soldier placed a helmet on the ground beside a fallen comrade and whispered a prayer. Others walked among the wreckage, silent, haunted. For those who survived, the Battle of 73 Easting would not be remembered for glory, but for precision, for tragedy, for brotherhood, and for the awful price of supremacy. In the end, the battle was not merely a clash of machines. It was a final echo of an old kind of warfare, a mechanized crescendo before the digital age swept in. And for the men who rolled into the storm, who faced fire and made history, 73 Easting would remain etched into their souls, not as a grid coordinate on a map, but as the place where war changed forever. Subscribe for more good old days.